What happens when your dream of building a cozy guesthouse turns into a war with the HOA? For Alex and Rachel, their tiny home wasn't just a project, it was a symbol of freedom, sustainability, and family. But they had no idea how far their neighborhood association would go to stop them. Alex and Rachel Harper had always dreamed of creating a little slice of paradise on their property. After years of saving and planning, they finally took the leap, building a tiny home in their backyard as a guesthouse for visiting family and friends. It wasn't just about functionality, it was about embracing a simpler, more sustainable way of living. The tiny home was eco-friendly, energy-efficient, and designed with love, featuring large windows that let in natural light and a small garden bed outside for fresh herbs. For Alex, it was a chance to reconnect with his DIY roots, spending weekends hammering nails and painting walls alongside Rachel. For Rachel, it was a vision of hospitality, a cozy space where loved ones could feel at home. They imagined holiday gatherings, lazy summer afternoons, and quiet evenings spent laughing with family under the stars. But not everyone shared their excitement. One crisp autumn morning, as Alex and Rachel were putting the finishing touches on the tiny home, a black sedan pulled up to the curb outside their house. Out stepped Mr. Harold Jenkins, the president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, a man infamous for his rigid adherence to rules. Clutching a clipboard, he marched toward the couple with an air of authority. "Good morning," he said curtly, adjusting his glasses. "I'm afraid I need to inform you that this structure violates Article 5, Section 3 of the HOA guidelines. Specifically, the clause regarding approved auxiliary buildings. All such modifications must be pre-approved by the board." Rachel blinked, momentarily stunned. "Are you serious? This is a tiny home, it's sustainable, functional, and adds value to our property. How can anyone object to that?" Mr. Jenkins sighed, flipping through the pages of his clipboard. "Be that as it may, the rules exist to maintain aesthetic consistency throughout the neighborhood. If this modification isn't removed within 30 days, we'll have no choice but to issue fines." Alex felt a surge of frustration bubbling beneath the surface. He glanced at the tiny home, its warm wooden exterior glowing softly in the morning sun. How could anyone see this as a problem? Wasn't innovation more important than arbitrary rules? "We're sorry, but we can't do that," Alex replied firmly. "This tiny home represents everything we believe in: sustainability, creativity, and family. Surely, there's some way we can find common ground." Mr. Jenkins shook his head. "Rules are rules. I suggest you reconsider before things escalate further." As he walked back to his car, Alex and Rachel exchanged worried glances. They had poured their hearts and savings into this project, and now it was being threatened by bureaucracy. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, they made a decision. They weren't going to back down, not without a fight. This wasn't just about a tiny home anymore, it was about standing up for what mattered. And if the HOA wanted a war, they were going to get one. For Alex and Rachel, the tiny home wasn't just a structure, it was a symbol of everything they valued. But as the HOA tightened its grip, they realized this fight would take more than just determination. The days following Mr. Jenkins' visit were a whirlwind of emotions for Alex and Rachel. Anger, frustration, and disbelief swirled inside them as they grappled with the absurdity of the situation. How could an organization meant to protect property values dictate something as innovative and sustainable as a tiny home? It felt like a betrayal, not just of their project, but of the principles they had worked so hard to embrace. But Alex and Rachel weren't the type to let injustice slide. They decided to educate themselves about the HOA's guidelines and local housing laws. After hours of research, they discovered a crucial detail: while the HOA could regulate aesthetics, they couldn't outright ban structures that complied with zoning laws and building codes, as long as those structures served a legitimate purpose. Armed with this knowledge, Alex drafted a polite but firm letter to the board, arguing that their tiny home was not only functional but also aligned with broader efforts to promote sustainability and affordable housing. "We understand the importance of maintaining neighborhood standards," he wrote. "However, our tiny home promotes eco-friendly living and provides a valuable space for family and guests. It complies with all applicable regulations and should be considered an asset to the community." They sent the letter off, hoping for a positive response. But deep down, they knew it was unlikely. The HOA prided itself on uniformity, and exceptions, even well-reasoned ones, were rarely granted. As the days passed, Alex and Rachel noticed subtle changes in their interactions with neighbors. Some avoided eye contact when passing their house, clearly uncomfortable with the brewing conflict. Others, however, stopped by to express quiet support. One afternoon, a young couple named Sarah and Mike approached Alex and Rachel while they were working on landscaping around the tiny home. "We think what you're doing is amazing," Sarah said softly, glancing over her shoulder to ensure no one was listening. "We've always wanted to build something like this, but we were too scared of breaking the rules. You're inspiring us to push back." Alex and Rachel smiled, touched by the comment. For the first time since the confrontation with Mr. Jenkins, they felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they weren't alone in this fight. Encouraged by Sarah and Mike's words, Alex and Rachel decided to take their campaign to the next level. They reached out to local advocacy groups specializing in sustainable housing and property rights, inviting them to join their cause. Within days, photos of their tiny home began appearing on social media platforms, accompanied by captions praising their creativity and resilience. "This is what innovation looks like," one advocate wrote beneath a photo of the cozy interior. "Why punish someone for embracing sustainability?" The post quickly gained traction, sparking conversations about the absurdity of HOA restrictions and the importance of supporting eco-friendly initiatives. Neighbors who had previously remained silent started chiming in, sharing their own frustrations with the HOA's rigid rules. "Why can't we have tiny homes like this?" one resident commented. "It's practical and environmentally friendly." Another added, "If Alex and Rachel get fined, I'll build one too. Enough is enough." Meanwhile, Mr. Jenkins grew increasingly agitated. He called an emergency meeting of the HOA board, accusing the couple of deliberately trying to undermine their authority. "We cannot allow this kind of behavior to continue," he declared. "If we let them get away with it, everyone will start thinking they can do whatever they want." The board agreed to send Alex and Rachel a formal warning, reminding them of the impending fine if they didn't comply. But instead of intimidating them, the letter only strengthened their resolve. They realized that the HOA's resistance was rooted in fear, a fear of losing control. And they were determined to prove that change was possible. That weekend, Alex and Rachel hosted a small gathering in their backyard, inviting neighbors to tour the tiny home and learn about its benefits. They handed out brochures about sustainable living and encouraged others to consider eco-friendly alternatives. By the end of the day, several residents had pledged to join their cause, vowing to challenge the HOA's outdated policies. As Alex stood among his supporters, watching children explore the tiny home and neighbors exchange tips on sustainable design, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about their project anymore, it was about creating a movement. A movement that celebrated individuality, sustainability, and the power of community. But he also knew the road ahead would be difficult. The HOA wasn't going to back down easily, and the battle was far from over. Still, Alex and Rachel refused to let fear dictate their choices. If anything, the growing support only fueled their determination to see this through. What started as one couple's stand for sustainability became a rallying cry for an entire community, and soon, the whole nation was watching. The gathering in Alex and Rachel's backyard had been a turning point. For the first time, neighbors who had previously stayed silent began speaking out against the HOA's restrictive rules. Inspired by the couple's courage, they started exploring eco-friendly alternatives, some researching tiny homes, others installing solar panels or rainwater collection systems. Within weeks, Willow Creek looked less like a cookie-cutter suburb and more like a hub of innovation and creativity. But Mr. Jenkins wasn't ready to concede. He saw the growing movement as a direct threat to his authority, and he wasn't going down without a fight. Determined to squash the rebellion, he called another emergency HOA meeting, this time with a plan to escalate the situation. He proposed fining not only Alex and Rachel but also any homeowner caught building or promoting unapproved structures. His argument? Uniformity was non-negotiable, and allowing exceptions would set a dangerous precedent. The proposal sparked outrage among residents. During the meeting, several homeowners stood up to challenge Mr. Jenkins, citing studies about the benefits of sustainable living and the rising popularity of tiny homes nationwide. One resident, a retired architect named Tom, pointed out that the HOA's actions might violate zoning laws intended to encourage affordable housing. Another neighbor shared a story about how her daughter had always dreamed of designing eco-friendly spaces, a dream she refused to abandon despite the HOA's restrictions. Despite the backlash, Mr. Jenkins refused to budge. He argued that the HOA's primary responsibility was maintaining property values, not promoting individual hobbies or sustainability. If we allow one person to break the rules, he warned, we'll have chaos. But Alex and Rachel weren't backing down either. They knew that winning this battle required more than just local support, it needed national attention. So, they reached out to a prominent sustainable housing advocate named Emily Green, whose YouTube channel had millions of subscribers. Emily was immediately intrigued by their story and agreed to visit Willow Creek to document the conflict. When Emily arrived, she spent hours filming the tiny home, interviewing Alex and Rachel, and even staging a mock confrontation with Mr. Jenkins. The resulting video, titled "How One Couple Fought Back Against an Overbearing HOA," went viral almost instantly. It showcased Alex and Rachel's journey from dreamers to rebels, highlighting the absurdity of the HOA's rules and the broader implications of their actions. Within days, the video had garnered millions of views, sparking conversations across social media platforms. Hashtags like #TinyHomeRevolution and #HOAFreedom trended globally, drawing attention from news outlets, influencers, and even politicians. Suddenly, Alex and Rachel's struggle wasn't just about their tiny home, it was part of a larger debate about homeowners' rights, sustainability, and the role of HOAs in modern communities. Meanwhile, the HOA found itself under unprecedented scrutiny. Local reporters flooded Willow Creek, eager to cover the story. Neighbors who had initially remained neutral now came forward to share their own experiences with unreasonable HOA rules. One woman recounted how she'd been fined for hanging laundry on a clothesline instead of using a dryer. Another described being forced to remove a bird feeder because it violated aesthetic guidelines. As the pressure mounted, the HOA board began to fracture. Some members, realizing the tide was turning against them, started questioning whether their rigid policies were worth the backlash. Others, including Mr. Jenkins, dug in deeper, clinging to their belief in absolute control. Alex and Rachel, meanwhile, continued building alliances. They partnered with local advocacy groups specializing in property rights and sustainability, drafting petitions calling for reforms to HOA regulations. Within weeks, thousands of signatures poured in, drawing support from homeowners across the country who had faced similar battles. But the most powerful moment came when Emily Green returned to Willow Creek for a follow-up video. This time, she invited Mr. Jenkins to participate in a public debate, pitting him against Alex, Rachel, and other residents who supported sustainable living. The showdown took place at the community center, filling every seat and spilling into overflow rooms. Cameras from local news stations lined the walls, capturing every word exchanged between the two sides. Mr. Jenkins tried to defend the HOA's stance, citing concerns about property values and uniformity. But Alex countered each argument with evidence: photos of thriving tiny homes, testimonials from families saving money on utilities, and even studies showing how green spaces improved mental health and reduced carbon footprints. When asked about the concrete reasons behind their rules, Mr. Jenkins stumbled, unable to provide anything beyond vague notions of community standards. By the end of the debate, it was clear that the tide had turned. Even some of Mr. Jenkins's staunchest supporters began to question whether the HOA's approach was outdated. As the audience erupted in applause, Alex and Rachel felt a surge of pride, not just for themselves but for everyone who had stood up alongside them. Still, they knew the fight wasn't over yet. The HOA hadn't officially backed down, and there were still fines looming over their heads. But for the first time, they felt hopeful. With national attention, growing support, and a strategic plan in place, they believed they could win this battle and inspire others to do the same. The debate at the community center had been a watershed moment for Willow Creek. For years, residents had quietly resented the HOA's iron grip on their lives, but now they had a voice, and leaders in Alex and Rachel Harper. Their calm demeanor, combined with undeniable evidence of the benefits of tiny homes and sustainable living, had inspired even the most hesitant neighbors to join the cause. But Mr. Jenkins wasn't ready to surrender just yet. In the days following the debate, he doubled down on his efforts to enforce the HOA's rules. Notices began appearing on doorsteps across the neighborhood, warning homeowners to remove any unapproved structures or face escalating fines. Some residents received letters threatening legal action if they didn't comply within 48 hours. Alex and Rachel saw these tactics for what they were: an act of desperation. The HOA was trying to intimidate people into submission, but they knew better than to let fear dictate their choices. Instead of backing down, they rallied their supporters, organizing a mass protest outside the HOA office. Dozens of families showed up, holding signs that read "Tiny Homes, Big Dreams," and "Sustainability over Uniformity." Parents pushed strollers while kids played near makeshift models of eco-friendly houses, turning the demonstration into a celebration of innovation and creativity. Local news crews covered the event extensively, capturing footage of children laughing as they explored tiny home replicas while parents chanted slogans demanding reform. One reporter interviewed a young boy who proudly held up a handmade model of a tiny house. "This is what the future looks like," he said, grinning. "And we're standing with Alex and Rachel." The protest drew national attention, with major outlets picking up the story. Politicians weighed in, praising Alex and Rachel's courage and calling for statewide reviews of HOA policies. A state representative even announced plans to introduce legislation protecting homeowners' rights to build sustainable structures, regardless of HOA rules. For the first time, it felt like real change was possible, not just for Willow Creek but for communities everywhere. Meanwhile, the HOA board descended into chaos. Several members resigned, citing personal reasons or moral objections to the crackdown. Others openly criticized Mr. Jenkins, accusing him of alienating residents and damaging the neighborhood's reputation. By the end of the week, the board was fractured, with no clear leadership or direction. But Mr. Jenkins still clung to power, determined to salvage his authority. He called another emergency meeting, this time inviting local officials and media to address the controversy. Dressed in his usual suit and tie, he stood before a packed room of reporters and residents, attempting to defend the HOA's stance. "We understand that emotions are running high," he began, his tone measured but strained. "However, the rules exist to maintain property values and ensure uniformity within our community. Allowing exceptions, even seemingly harmless ones, could set a dangerous precedent." His statement was met with boos and jeers from the crowd. One resident shouted, "Uniformity? Really? Over sustainability?" Another chimed in, "Why don't you tell us how much money you've spent suing neighbors instead of supporting green initiatives?" The chaos escalated until security guards had to escort several angry attendees out of the room. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that the HOA's reputation had taken a massive hit. Even longtime supporters were questioning whether the organization had gone too far. Back at home, Alex and Rachel watched the live stream of the meeting with a mix of satisfaction and relief. They had started this journey alone, but now they had an entire community standing behind them. Still, they knew the fight wasn't over. The HOA hadn't officially backed down, and there were still fines looming over their heads. To keep the momentum going, Alex and Rachel launched a crowdfunding campaign to cover legal fees and support other families facing similar battles. Donations poured in from across the country, exceeding their goal within days. Local businesses offered discounts to participants in the tiny home revolution movement, while schools invited them to speak to students about sustainability and civic engagement. As the weeks passed, the transformation of Willow Creek became undeniable. More and more backyards filled with eco-friendly projects, tiny homes, solar panels, and rainwater collection systems. Neighbors who had once avoided each other now exchanged tips on sustainable design and construction. The sense of camaraderie was palpable, turning the neighborhood into a true community. But Alex and Rachel remained focused on the bigger picture. With the help of advocacy groups and pro bono lawyers, they filed a formal complaint with the State Housing Authority, accusing the HOA of overreach and discrimination against sustainable practices. They also drafted a proposal for revised guidelines, emphasizing flexibility and inclusivity over rigid conformity. By the time fall arrived, the HOA was forced to acknowledge the shifting tide. Under mounting pressure, they agreed to temporarily suspend enforcement of Article 5, Section 3, the clause banning unapproved auxiliary buildings. While they framed the decision as a gesture of goodwill, it was clear to everyone that the rebellion had won. For Alex and Rachel, the victory was bittersweet. On one hand, they were thrilled to see their tiny home thrive without fear of fines or threats. On the other hand, they missed the simplicity of those early days when building it had been just about creating something beautiful and functional. Still, they understood the importance of what they had accomplished. "It's not just about us anymore," Rachel told Sarah one evening as they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset. "It's about proving that we can make a difference, if we stand together." Sarah nodded, smiling. "You've already made a difference. Look at how far we've come." In that moment, surrounded by laughter and the scent of blooming flowers, Alex and Rachel realized something profound. Change wasn't easy, it required patience, persistence, and courage. But when people came together for a common cause, anything was possible. By winter, Willow Creek was unrecognizable from the cookie-cutter suburb it had once been. The monotony of manicured lawns and uniform mailboxes had given way to a vibrant tapestry of creativity and sustainability. Backyards were filled with tiny homes, solar panels, and vegetable gardens, each one unique yet connected by a shared spirit of innovation and eco-consciousness. Neighbors exchanged produce over fences, shared tips on composting, and collaborated on community projects that celebrated green living. It was as if the entire neighborhood had awakened, both literally and figuratively. For Alex and Rachel, the transformation was deeply personal. Their tiny home, once a source of conflict, had become a symbol of hope and resilience. They no longer feared fines or threats. Instead, they felt pride every time someone stopped to admire their handiwork or ask for advice. What had started as a dream to build a cozy guesthouse had grown into something far greater. A movement that celebrated individuality, sustainability, and community. The HOA, meanwhile, underwent its own metamorphosis. Faced with overwhelming public pressure and legal scrutiny, the board voted to dissolve itself, paving the way for a new governing body elected by residents. This time, Candidates ran on platforms of transparency, inclusivity, and environmental stewardship. Alex and Rachel themselves were approached to run, but they declined, preferring to focus on grassroots efforts rather than formal leadership roles. Still, they remained actively involved in shaping Willow Creek's future, working closely with the new board to draft guidelines that prioritized flexibility and collaboration over rigidity and control. One of the most significant changes came in the form of statewide legislation inspired by Alex and Rachel's fight. The proposed bill, championed by the state representative who had supported their cause, sought to protect homeowners' rights to build sustainable structures, regardless of HOA rules. Dubbed the Tiny Home Freedom Act, it passed unanimously, setting a precedent for communities across the country. Local news outlets hailed Alex and Rachel as heroes, and invitations poured in for them to speak at conferences, schools, and advocacy events. But despite the accolades, Alex and Rachel stayed grounded. They knew that real change wasn't about fame or recognition, it was about empowering others to make a difference in their own lives. To that end, they launched a nonprofit organization called Roots of Resilience, dedicated to promoting sustainable living and challenging restrictive housing policies. Through workshops, online resources, and community outreach programs, the initiative helped countless families transform their properties into thriving ecosystems. As spring returned to Willow Creek, Alex and Rachel hosted a neighborhood celebration to mark the one-year anniversary of their rebellion. Tables were set up along the street, laden with dishes made from homegrown ingredients and decorated with colorful wildflowers. Musicians performed lively songs on porches, while children ran through sprinklers and painted murals of tiny homes and solar panels on sidewalks. At the center of it all stood Alex and Rachel, raising a glass of freshly squeezed lemonade in a toast. "To Willow Creek," Alex said, his voice warm but steady. "May we always remember that beauty isn't about uniformity, it's about diversity. And may we never forget what happens when we stand together." The crowd erupted in cheers, clinking glasses and applauding. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt alive, not with tension or conformity, but with genuine connection. Alex glanced around at the smiling faces, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. They had started this fight alone, but they hadn't finished it that way. Together, they had turned a personal battle into a movement for change. That evening, as Alex and Rachel sat on their porch watching the sunset, they reflected on everything that had happened. Yes, the road had been long and difficult, but it had also been worth it. Willow Creek may never be perfect, but thanks to their courage and the community's unity, it was on the path to becoming a better, fairer place for everyone. And in that moment, surrounded by friends, family, and neighbors, Alex and Rachel knew they'd made the right choice. This wasn't just their victory, it belonged to all of them.